All right, and welcome to episode 36 of Into the Rift. I'm your usual host, Nugan, and with me I have Nasser, who's now writing for Follow Esports,
Hello, good to be back.
Chase, who's editor in chief for MYM, yes,
Nice to see you guys.
and resident salty expert, Kelsey Moser. Hello,
Hello.
live from Europe. All right, we're just gonna. This won't be a big episode. We're just cover the quarterfinals since they were last week. We're not gonna bother going over the week two group stages because that was 2 weeks ago, and honestly, there was kind of a shit show. If we were to talk about it, we would just be shitting on everyone. So after quarterfinals, we'll talk about semifinals. All right. So let's start with the first semifinal. I mean quarterfinal. Flash Wolves was Origin. Anyone got any profound thoughts on it?
Uh, Both teams didn't really play at a high level. I think Origin still showed weaknesses that they had during week two, which is playing these late game scaling comps, relying a lot on the Anivia. They actually lost the game when they didn't pick Anivia. So I'm wondering how they're going to adapt moving forward and whether SKT, when they face them, how if they're going to remove Anivia either by banning it or by picking it.
Well, it's one of those things where the Anivia pick, it's something that they did in the group stage, but it really did feel like a perfect pick to take against a Flash Wolves team that really only had two weapons. NL and Maple combined for over 60% of their team's damage. NL in particular was like 35% of his team's damage throughout that series. When you only have two damage targets, you isolate one from the ice wall. Now you've got a 5v4 with only one threat. Stake is not beating you. Karza, the way he was playing, I was really unimpressed by what Karza did in this particular series. I felt he could have been someone that could have thrown off Origin's early game. He just didn't have the pressure that would have needed to do that. So now you have these team fights where if you don't manage to get both of your high damage targets exactly where you need them to be, Origin's just going to pick it off one by one, and it just forced Flash Wolves into having to make these objective trades that always went against them. If it wasn't for that terrible pentakill that they gave to Stoaz in the first Baron, and then the Dragon for Baron trade the second time because they were so afraid of the aspect, and then, of course, the backdoor they let in game one. I mean, there were so many times you can point to in that series where Flash Wolves were just forced into bad decisions because they weren't able to get around the fact that they only had two people that were scary on that team. That's not going to be a thing that Origin's going to be able to take advantage of with SKT, so it's going to be a very different style that we see from them for sure if they want to have any chance of taking a game in that series.
Yeah, you can definitely see that Flash Wolves knew how to play together and team fight together much better than Origin. But Origin had the more superior map play and strategic calls. They knew how to catch waves and set them up before objectives, and that's really I think what won Origin that series.
Okay,
I
so
think
I,
that this series was effectively two teams that didn't know how to play the early game, and then Origin knew how to play the late game
Mid game.
better.
Yeah.
So that was it. The end.
Flash Wolves were the third worst early game team in this tournament for what that's worth.
Yeah.
Only the Bangkok Titans and Cloud9 were worse in the early game than they were.
Is
That's
Origin
not a
right
good
after
sign.
them?
CLG was
Origin
better
is
than them?
actually there. Yeah, CLG was was 45. Was only 38.1. Edward Gaming 41.4. AHQ 44.9, and that's after the SKT series in which SKT just dominated them in the early game, which drastically lowered where they were before. It was really bad for Flash Wolves, and Karza was the guy who was supposed to turn that around. He plays these amazing Nidalee champions that could put early game pressure, and they just never trusted him to do it in this series. And I was very disappointed in Flash Wolves in that regard.
okay. I have a question for the
Bruce,
panel.
you're referring to the Oracle's Elixir early game ratings, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
So just to clarify, those are done based on regression, with dragon stats and tower stats and all this other stuff. So it's not like an absolute rating, but it's a rating done by Oracle'sElixir.com. So
That was weird. So question for everyone, because this is something me and some other people were talking about. NL as an AD carry, is he the real deal, or is it just because he's playing Jinx?
It's because he's
I
playing
think
Jinx.
I think NL is good with long range carries
Mhm.
because mechanically speaking, like his positioning isn't always super good.
Mhm.
But if it's long range, that provides a buffer for him to like stand in a position that makes sense.
Mhm.
He sometimes like cancels his own autos, like screws up abilities. You can see it when you watch. NL for me was the reason why I didn't watch LMS. Like I'm not even exaggerating. I swear I would turn on like a Flash Wolves game and NL would be playing like Lucian and he would be using ult when there's like a target right in front of him and he would be using on minions and completely not connect it. It's just really fucking bizarre, like honestly. How bad this guy was. But he could play long range better because I feel like long range gives you a buffer for some of the errors that you're doing. And his team was really good at peeling for him. So I think that's what we saw with the Jinx, with like some of the Varus games, I think with the Caitlyn, things like that.
Okay, that's fair assessment. I don't think we need to go too deep in this series, nor do we need to go too deep in the next one. But we'll cover it no matter what. Next series, SKT versus HQ. Not too much to say about here, but does anyone have anything they'd like to say about it? Marin,
I mean, Ziv is really good. You know, if you're looking for a bright spot for AHQ, he performed rather well in that series. For Amarin that was steamrolling over most of his opponents in the group stage, Ziv was able to hold his own, and he was able to hold his own in 1v2 situations. His Darius was very good and held up even against that Renekton counter pick. Other than that, Mountain is not very good at League of Legends. I think we learned that throughout this tournament.
it's
He
kind
has
of hard to
a
carry
really
him
hard
to
time
begin
in the
with.
game. Yeah, that's fair, but it really he goes and farms in the mid game and just leaves no pressure across the map. You can't do that against SKT. Westor's got to be happy that he ends up solo killing Faker on his birthday to end his career, but let's be clear. I don't think SKT is playing Kassadin if they're taking game 3 as seriously as they potentially could have
Line
been.
picking Kassadin, no.
I
no
hate
less.
Tristana. I just want to make this clear that I hate Tristana the way she is right now. So I feel like when you pick Tristana, you're effectively broadcasting, we're not doing anything mid game, literally nothing at all.
Yeah.
If we go into a team fight, you can just fucking cleanse the debuff, and then literally not that much damage is done. Whatever. Fuck Tristana, okay?
Yeah.
Like, straight up, I hate that champion. I feel like it's overpicked. It doesn't even have a good win rate. It's still overpicked.
Jinx right now does effectively what Tristana does, but better.
Better.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I just, like, she's okay early. She's okay super late. If you want a team fight with her, forget about it. Because the other enemy team brings cleanse, and I
Yeah.
feel like she's not very good.
It's only if
So,
you combo her with something like Azir, is she really that effective? That's when like her full potential comes out. But other than that, she's not really the best ADC pick right now.
like Tristana and is already weird, and then you put it with Kassadin, and you're just wondering why they won that game. I interviewed Koma after it, and I actually asked him. He's like, both of those champions are good in lane, and I wanted to just say, what? Like, did you watch the game I watched with the Fizz and the Kassadin doing the things? And it's just whatever. I mean, he obviously, like, Koma isn't going to give you a straight answer on anything. So. Yeah, I mean, it was whatever. But that's kind of, for me, that series just felt like Tristana picks and a bunch of, so when people watched and it was like, this is really questionable. Some of SKT's moves in the mid game are a little questionable. They're not pressuring all these things, but it's like they picked Tristana. They're not going to be able to do a whole lot. The fact that they still won those games after falling behind so hard early with the Westor and the Fizz is just like a statement on Westor not being able to pressure his lead. also a statement on SKT know what they're doing. And I'm actually more terrified by the fact that they won those games than I am by the rest of the tournament and what they played. So,
Yeah.
All right, that's fair. All right, so the next two quarterfinals, we'll get a little more into it. First up, Fnatic versus EDG. Kind of a shit show a little bit with the fucking remake and the spaghetti code catching up to Riot. Kelsey, you wanna get into this?
China sucks. That's it. That's all.
They've been
That's all?
exposed.
China exposed.
EDG's
No,
been-
I think that I don't want to make an excuse, but I think that had EDG been able to commit to solo laners all summer, they would have been a stronger team generally. I don't think any of those players are weak, but to me, when people talk about the Korean exodus and the Koreans going to China and how Koreans make it difficult to communicate, I disagree for the most part, but down to the point where you're talking about you have a bunch of skilled players who don't necessarily communicate super easily. You're going to emphasize just like raw skill overpowering your opponents, right? That's what you're going to emphasize rather than figuring out strategy and figuring out the meta. And I think that's what held them back, not necessarily in game communication, but developing strategy itself, just because you have super talented players, so why the fuck do you need to develop strategy? Especially if it's harder if they don't
Yeah.
talk to each other well. So that's the point I'd like to make on that, because I think people are focusing way too much on the mixed language roster. I think mixed language is fine as long as you're able to understand like the inherent limitations that come with that and still focus on it, which is where I think the ultimate failing was.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm going with. Also, I think the most disappointing thing about the entire tournament for China was the fact that Clearlove played like shit in this series when Clearlove has had like a phenomenal year. Screw you if you think that Clearlove is a terrible jungler. I have
You just
nothing
have
to say to
You
you.
just have to look back at his performance at MSI to know how good of a jungler he is. And he like if you look back to his LPL split, both in summer and in spring, you can just see he's had really like his best year so far. And yeah, it's unfortunate that he and his team did not show up
at
at
Worlds, yeah.
Worlds.
It's pretty fortunate because like when Clearlove fucks up at Worlds, people are like, over exaggeration, blah blah blah. But when Kakao fucks up, everyone will bend over backwards to defend him. Well, like
His team
Oh
sucked.
God, I gotta say, I'm an Invictus fan. Kakao was not good at this tournament. Can we just stop this narrative of, oh my God, Kakao was,
The
if he
difference
was
is
on a better
Kakao wasn't
team.
really good all year except for like regionals and
Yeah.
playoffs. At the very end of
Yeah,
playoffs, he
and
wasn't
that's-
even good for most of playoffs. Let's
Like-
let's
and-
be real.
And there were people, and I'm not going to name names because I try not to do that as much, but there were people who ranked Kakao above Clearlove on their list of top players going into this tournament. Those
That's
people
didn't
are,
watch LPL.
yeah, they're insane. They're absolutely insane. And, I would have loved to see EDG come out in this particular series. I thought there was a very big chance that this was going to be the one that went to 5 games in the quarterfinals, but it's really hard when you're Koro. You haven't played in a competitive game in 2 months. That's really hard to do. It's adjusting to multiple different patches, 3 patches, actually 4 patches, I think, since the last time we saw him necessarily playing at the level we expect of him. All the health issues he's been going through. It's really, really tough to be the guy that we know he could be and to punish some of the Huni over-aggression that, we're going to talk about in the semifinals, but that's a point you can attack if you're trying to throw Fnatic off their game. And it's really hard to do that when you're out of practice and haven't been given the chance to really be in the place you need to be the player that we know he can be. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Please.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say that I think the mistake that EDG made was putting Koro in at the last minute and still trying to play a style that they weren't used to. Because it wasn't so much that with the amazing J thing, I felt like EDG kind of left him out to dry a lot. Right? They just kind of left him alone and let him get like gangbanged effectively. Whereas with Koro, they tried to like meet the 2v2 or meet the 2v3. Whereas, Fnatic is used to sending a couple people top to play with Huni. And EDG tried to do that, but that Clearlove's pathing was really, really off for that. Like he would come too early or too late. And sometimes they would play the 2v3s with the tower. And I think Koro is really used to and really adept at, okay, we know they're going to send their jungler top, just play safe or evade the gank and all these other things. But the mistake they made was, we're going to try to contest this gank. Okay. 2v3 or whatever. And I think just Fnatic is much better at that. Koro's strength is his ability to evade those ganks or to back off or whatever, and that's not what they did. So it's unfortunate because I do think it is a top lane centric medic, and they were punished a lot in group stage for not playing towards that. But Koro is also better at not playing towards that than Amazing J is. So I think if they had Koro on his own and tried to still snowball bot, because Fnatic, let's be real, they don't care about their bot lane.
Yeah.
Um,
They're fine just playing the 2v2.
Then I think
So-
they could have put up something much stronger, just because EDG is more adept at doing that type of style, even if it doesn't suit the meta. Then, because we saw HQ do that, try to snowball bot and still drag out the game and almost win.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that they should have tried to do.
Yeah.
But-
Maybe.
Absolutely.
It's
I think-
whatever.
Yeah. I think with that being said, Fnatic have been looking amazing. Especially compared to week 1. I think week 1 they played really, really badly. They had poor drafts. I think they misread the meta. Stuff like picking Orianna and picking Hecarim and then picking Yasuo into Darius versus C9. I think they even confessed in an interview with Kelsey, actually. They said they were a bit cocky. They said they were winning scrims with basically anything they play. And when it came to Worlds, they tried that shit out and it didn't really pan out the way it panned out in scrims. So coming into week 2, I think they kind of refined stuff a lot, and they also innovated, and that's what I like seeing teams who, after they kind of fail, they bring something new that can work both for their team and also kind of surprise the enemy. And that was basically the Kennen pick in the ADC position for Reckless, because if you look at Fnatic and how they play, it's Huni going ham and Reignover, Yellowstar, and Febiven following him. And then you just have Reckless, who has Kennen with all the CC and kite ability with his little electric shock thingy. Forgot the name, but
Siphon Maelstrom.
yeah, and yeah, that basically. And so he has the kite ability, and he has the self peel, and as well this extra engage for Fnatic who love to team fight, especially around objectives. Having that Kennen ult can really, really be potent.
I agree. I think it was interesting because going into the quarterfinals, I noticed in solo queue Deft was playing a lot of Caitlyn,
Hmm.
and Caitlyn's good against Kennen and Sivir,
Mhm.
and
Jinx.
those were the champions
Well, kind of.
those were the champions that Fnatic had played in group stage, right? So I figured they were going to try to just counter bot line hard and snowball that, but they didn't. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think with that being said, Huni, I'm interested to see how Huni plays versus finally a team who has a really strong top laner, because
His
the top
opponents
laners
in top have not been so at the top.
he played Ziv, but he's handicapped by his team, and you can kind of make that same rationalization for Ku, who Smeb has Hojin, who isn't really a great player. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
We can also talk about how IG were suited and they played the meta style, but still didn't play the meta style. Because they
Yeah.
suck.
Didn't you like the Skarner pick, rushing Sightstone?
Oh god. He did 888 damage to champions. I don't even know
See,
how you do that.
My thing is that I've never been an Invictus Gaming fan. I've been surrounded by Invictus Gaming fans my entire life. And I've come to accept certain things about Invictus Gaming, which is that they're awful. So that's fun. I wrote 8,000 words about them. Okay, in my defense. Um. Let's
It-
see. Like the other thing is the weird thing about scrims, right? Is that EDG was beating Fnatic in scrims, like whatever.
As far as
Like,
they
as far as like according to Mako, according to Febiven, according to pretty much everyone you ask, like Fnatic didn't want to play EDG in quarters because EDG beats them in scrims all the time. EDG was like happy playing against Fnatic 'cause they beat Fnatic in scrims all the time. But whatever reason, I feel like part of it is that EDG, like they scrimmed a lot of Origin, they scrimmed a lot of Fnatic. I think that the different approach to strategy going into this tournament from what they were used to actually psyched them out a lot, which is really kind of cool by the European teams. Like that's pretty awesome. The fact that EDG like freaked out about the lane swap meta change and all this other shit. So
Yeah, I think on top of that, before we go on to the next, we can't not talk about Forbidden.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, Forbidden's insane. I was looking up the stats while we were talking about this. He is somehow, we talk about Faker all the time being a guy that's putting out incredible stats as far as damage, early game advantages and whatever without getting a lot of gold. Forbidden's basically doing the same thing. He's only getting 24% of his team's gold, but doing 31% of the damage. He's got a 7.7 CS lead at 10 minutes. He's got a 270 gold lead at 10 minutes. He has a 6.9 KDA. I mean, and they're never ganking for him because Reignover's constantly having to gank
Yeah.
top to make sure Huni doesn't die.
Also doesn't ward.
He,
He
Febiven
doesn't
does-
he doesn't spend money on wards.
Sure.
So
That's
he
true.
can get more combat stats.
Exposed.
Like
Sure.
he,
And
like
And-
Pawn,
and-
for example, wards 5 times as much as Febiven. So Febiven isn't spending any fucking money on wards, like ever, which is
Sure.
good. I mean, it's smart because he's obviously carrying the team.
and
But at
and
the
his
same
te-
time, it's like that's why I feel like that has a contribution to some of the damage stats that he does is because he's
Sure.
able to spend more
And I
money
think the way
on
the
offensive
team
items.
is kind of built up is that Yellow Star has taken the burden of warding for the team, and I think he's been placing the most wards, or is that Mako? One of the
No.
two.
Peekaboo and Maku are still above Yellowstar.
Okay,
And,
and then-
so is
and-
Gorilla actually.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. But I think
wards per player.
I think Yellow Star still like is above
He's-
average in terms
He's
of
top
sports.
4, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. And it seems like Fnatic care more about not putting so much of the support, like warding pressure on Huni and Febiven, and just
Mhm.
letting them do the damage. But also to put
Cooney still wards
context,
a lot actually.
Yeah, I was gonna say Huni ward. It's the second most of any top laner left, sixth
Oh, really?
most in the tournament.
Mhm. It's
Marin
just
is
Febiven.
is just slightly above him. Yeah, it's
Honest
interesting.
to God, it's just Febiven.
I think okay. Well, I'm gonna give Febiven the benefit of that because he gets no help from his team because Huni takes all the resources early. So I don't care if he doesn't ward. He's been playing amazing. Like no one can doubt that. Like the things he's been doing, even in group stages and in the EDG game, just overturning fights and just constantly making plays. He's self-sufficient. His laning has improved, though you can make the argument that he hasn't played an amazing mid laner yet.
Who's he played so far again?
Pawn, Incarnation, Rookie, and
Nagne. I would say Rookie is at his best a very good one.
yeah, but he's also handicapped by his team. So and then he's gonna play Kuro now, and so maybe the only real test is when he plays versus Faker. But I don't wanna.
I mean, I do
Uh,
feel like Rookie did show him up.
Mhm.
Yeah, in the Echo game,
Right.
he
And it's whatever. Like honestly, I don't really care about 1v1 so much. I think
Yeah.
Febiven has had a great tournament. I just think it's really interesting how little he wards relative to some other random.
do you think that's a problem
Um,
for Fnatic and how they play the game?
I think they still ward a lot.
Yeah.
It's really
What
interesting
is it?
because I think Reignover wards because the spread of jungler warding is actually really small, but Reignover is still towards the top because I think that
Mhm.
when I was thinking about this matchup, the EDG versus Fnatic matchup, is that EDG puts more emphasis on their laners warding generally. Because Deft also, at the time that I was doing this, I haven't looked at it after the games, Deft was the highest warding AD carry. So, and Clearlove was like towards the bottom, actually only 007X worded less than him. So, but it was still like 0.84 relative to 1. Like the spread of jungler warding is really small. But I just thought it was interesting because to me it sounded like Fnatic places more emphasis on having their jungle ward
Yeah.
than EDG, who puts more emphasis on having their lanes ward. So I just thought that was an interesting way to look at it because if you have your lanes ward more often, then you're more reliant on your lanes getting ahead, I
So-
think.
So I think
To have vision.
so. I think what Febiven does, um, counter to what uh, the other mid laners that ward is that he buys the scrying or not scrying or sweeping lens, and like Pawn buys he upgrades his warding trinket, the totem. So I think it's a team decision rather than like Febiven doesn't ward.
Mhm.
It's more that
It's
the
No,
team
but
has
it
decided
doesn't.
that he should uh, concentrate on clearing vision
Well,
rather than warding,
it's
which might be a
funny.
problem, might not be a problem, but it seems like a team decision rather than a player one.
Chase.
I was going to say, if you look at the team stats overall, Fnatic has placed the fourth most wards of any team at this tournament per minute. They're at 3.57. The only teams that did better, KT Rolster at the number one with 4.09, then Ku Tigers 3.76, and EDG at 3.74. So Fnatic has been feeling very good about the wards they're placing. The idea that Forbidden is clearing more wards is kind of it doesn't work out as well when you look at the ward cleared percentage. They're only clearing 29.3% of their wards right now. That puts them at 11th. The good news for them is that Ku Tigers is somehow worse at 14th. So it's interesting. We're going against two teams that ward more than most of the teams in this tournament and
Yeah.
more than any of the teams that are left in this tournament, but also have not been very good at clearing wards. Whereas SKT maybe hasn't placed as many wards as some other team. They're actually 11th
That
in
stat could
wards
be
placed,
pretty
but their wards
misleading.
cleared is most. Yeah,
That
No,
stat can be
that's what
pretty
I mean.
misleading because
Febiven
who are
is
they going
only-
against?
There are actually only 5 mid laners who Febiven has cleared more wards than. So Febiven isn't even like clearing that
Right.
many wards relative to other mids. So I don't think that's accurate. I just think that like he's putting more gold into offensive stats, which I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
I just like I think it's actually showing in their results is that Febiven is able to get like that little much more ahead, and I think that like being able to put items on him earlier and faster is actually showing off in their results. Because when they put like a LeBlanc with who isn't spending money on wards bottom, then he has like a little bit of extra advantage in like the 3v1 threes or 3v2s, and I don't think teams are accounting for that at all,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they're losing to him, in part.
So what's the answer to that? Do you just put more
Um,
pressure on Febiven early on because he doesn't ward himself? Do you bait Rain
We-
over? Like,
Be aware of the fact that he's gonna have like an extra Doran's ring or something, and account for that in your duels, like when he roams. I think that's the best way to do it.
I think that's another thing to bring up is that Febiven has been roaming a lot,
Mhm.
and he's really good at just leaving his pushing out like the wave and
shoving
saying,
the wave and roaming. No.
yeah, and roaming. I don't know. I just really like. I've been really impressed with Febiven. Like he's not the perfect player yet. He's not Faker, and I don't think he
No.
probably won't ever be Faker. But I think
No, no,
he.
I think it's
think he's
important to
definitely a-
talk about why he's been so successful. Is all I'm saying. Is like
Mhm.
he's like I think everyone here accepts that he's been super successful and super good, but the question is why. So,
Yeah.
Don't worry, Nasser. We're not shaming you for being a hopeless, helpless Febiven fanboy.
The thing is, like, I wasn't too hyped on the kid forward, but I think because like
right about NA.
I write about I watch it. I watch and I've started.
Pure
I've
Sim
written
fan.
about EU before. I've written about another EU mid laner before, but
Pure Sim
it's
fanboy.
because I want to see consistency in a player for being able to judge him, and I want to see that consistency at a high competitive level.
It's good, safe to say that we've all approved Febvin in our eyes as a good winner. All right. Last quarterfinals match: KT versus Ku. A lot of people actually thought Ku was gonna win. I'm sorry, KT was gonna win this one.
I didn't. Ha! Fuck
Ah,
you.
good job.
Me
So what
neither,
happened?
because
So
KT,
what happened here?
yeah, like KT, they're very predictable. I've been saying this. I think I said this on the first episode I appeared.
You did.
They have kind of like this one-dimensional style, which is like in the early game. They rely a lot on getting ahead in the early end. If they don't, they are a bit clueless, especially in the mid and late game. And I also think that Nagne, I talked in the last episode, he is a huge liability. I think he's not even he's playing worse than he did in Korea somehow, and his stats have been abysmal. You know, he's been taking 24% of his team's gold, so a bit below average. But then also still playing champions like Azir and Victor, and only doing 372 damage per minute, which is like the worst out of all mids, including the likes of G4 and Westdoor. And that contributes towards 22% of his team's damage, which is also the worst out of all mids. And I don't know, like, why has he been playing worse than he has been in Korea? Like, he hasn't been he hasn't been able to be relied upon, especially in team fights. I think he's just playing worse overall, and I think that's one of the reasons, including like their predictability, as to why KT had a poor showing versus Ku.
Well, one of the things that really killed him is that it seemed like they bought into some of the hype that Ssumday was the guy that needed to win every game for them. I mean, the way that they would overextend trying to keep him alive if he was ever caught out of position. I mean, I remember a fight near the Baron Pit, I believe in game 2, where he was caught out. Had they just let him die, it would have been a 5v4. There wasn't much that Ku could do about it. But instead, they put everything in trying to keep him alive. It ends up being a 3-for-1 in Ku's favor. They get the Baron and end up winning that game. And there were so many times in that series where if you're going to trust Ssumday, if you're going to put all of it on his shoulders and tell him, okay, Ssumday, you're our damage guy. This is a top-centric meta. You take care of this. And then you put, all of Score's stuff. I mean, the one guy I actually did like in this series was Score. He was, in games 1, 2, and 4, he kept giving Ssumday these kills, kept giving him these early lane leads that we've seen Ssumday snowball in this tournament. And then Ssumday would overextend without the vision to know where the ganks were coming from. And Smeb would get back in this. And then suddenly they were playing from behind. And KT does not play well from behind. It was a really disappointing performance from Ssumday as a whole. And it really limited, it put some desperation into KT's decision making that I think really cost them in the long run.
Kelsey?
You have something to say, or you just?
I wouldn't fix it on Sunday, just KT in general. I just think that habitually we've seen KT doesn't know how to play mid game. Like,
yep.
And I think we saw it in the Origin game where they had so much trouble closing the fucking game. Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
They just kept diving stuff and going for this and all this, the questionable nature. I think they understand what to do in the early game, but if they don't get so far ahead in the early game that they can close, they have a lot of trouble. And Ku, I think, is the kind of team that does really well with mid to late game. Yeah. Just naturally, they do terrible in the early game too. So it's just also Ku's drafting was much better in general, and I think drafting in this tournament has been super important. So
yep. KT did not have the best of drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the game 3 was the best example of that. You look at what Ku was able to do by leaving the Lulu open. Ssumday doesn't want to play Lulu because Ssumday wants to hard carry. That's something they already knew was going to come in. So now you force it to go on the mid lane, and so now KT doesn't want to play the hyper scaling AD carries. It wasn't how they were playing the series. So they do the Kalista with the Lulu, which is a weird kind of combo, and then Malphite, which is just not a Ssumday
that's
champion.
Fine.
Well, the bigger problem is that Arrow isn't known for his Kalista. He's a Kog'Maw player,
Right.
and he had the opportunity to pick Kog'Maw in each and every single one of these games.
Yeah.
And they did not pick Kog'Maw. He has an absurd win rate on that champ, and he overperformed with it in the group stages. And I don't know, I don't see him as a Kalista player. And he picked Kalista
Like I think
twice. at
Callisto
this
Lulu
series.
is fine. It's just not something that you would pick.
Well, they
for play.
picked Kalista,
I mean,
Lulu, and Malphite.
Arrow.
Right.
They
It's
picked Kalista, Lulu, and Malphite. You have no damage on that team.
yeah. It's a thing that could have worked if they'd picked other pieces around it, but they don't mesh together. And in the best case scenario, it's just not a very KT style. Again, the Juggernaut was there, and we've seen KT win with it in this tournament. We've seen KT win with it so much throughout Korea. Why not? Why not? I still don't have an explanation as to why they went the way they did, and it clearly didn't work. They had that was the game in which they looked lost from start to finish. I mean, they didn't win the early game in that one, and I think that it was just one of those things where Ku understood exactly what to do to throw KT off in this pick and ban phase, and KT wasn't prepared for what No Fei had in mind. Ku won the mental game as much as anything else.
Speaking of drafting, I don't think there's much else we're gonna be talking about this series specifically, but moving from quarters to semis, Gragas is now disabled. I forget, are two other champions disabled along with him?
Lux
Yeah, Lux and Ziggs.
Ziggs.
Okay, who cares about them?
Easy Hoon does, and he's gonna play versus Origin.
Was that actually confirmed or was that a mistake?
The Easy Hoon is gonna start.
Oh, so it's actually confirmed. Well,
Yeah, that's
un-
confirmed.
Well, that's unfortunate for Easy Hoon. So
Baker didn't know this yesterday. I just want to point this out.
Faker didn't know it.
Or he
Oh,
didn't
that-
seem to know this yesterday.
Because apparently there was an
He was
interview.
like, the best player will play. I think I will play. I was like, that's
see,
not
because
clear.
there's so much confusion about it, so I wasn't sure if like someone messed up when they announced it or announced it. Okay, so East Turns is starting. But aside the point, Gragas is now gone. How does this affect drafting going into semis? And who does it affect most?
Well, as far as who it affects most, Amazing is the one that a lot of people are pointing to. He played 4 games on that champion. It wasn't particularly great in the early game. He had the longest game time on Origin during those games. Lowest KDA among all the junglers he was playing. Kill participation only 55.6%. It just what it gave was consistency. It was his lowest death count. Gives peel for Niels, which is how they like to play. And he was the best at warding in those games. He was averaging a ward a minute when he was playing that Gragas. The problem for him is that the backup plan we've seen so far is the Evelynn. That didn't work out very well when they played it against LGD. Lee Sin is something that you would traditionally associate with Amazing, but he hasn't played it in competitive with one exception, and it was a 1-5-3 game in which he was incredibly farm heavy and didn't really do much. So that's a team I think if you're on blue side, you ban Elise, first pick the Rek'Sai, and just force Origin to prove that they can do something they haven't proven to do so far.
You can
But-
even ban the Lee Sin and just put Amazing off those like 3 comfort champions, and then with Gragas banned, he'd have to resort to something like Nidalee, or maybe as a pocket pick, or maybe he plays the Volibear or the Zinzao.
Hey man, we haven't seen Volibear yet. There's still hope.
Oh yeah, then we can brag about more champion diversity at Worlds. Go
Tom
over!
Kemp's jungle. Just eat Niels. And
Like I
everyone.
legitimately think Tom Kent's jungle is absurd. If you've seen it in solo queue, it's disgusting.
I think we're gonna see Tom Kent's jungle sometime this weekend.
I hope to do, but I feel like teams might not want to pick a champion in the jungle that can't provide early pressure, because Tom Kent's early clears and
His
his
first clear's
pressure early on.
horrific.
Yeah, it's really bad. You can double jungle, but still, you don't really have that early pressure that something like Nidalee or Eve, or even kind of like Nunu. Nunu's able to move around the map really easily and place wards and stuff. So
Besides, most people seem to be liking the Tom in lane more.
yeah, I think you can put it in support and even top before considering putting it.
Jungle, yeah. It makes sense just because there are better junglers than Tom in the early game. So, anyway,
But yeah, back to amazing.
But
I
if you
think
can eat your AD carry.
yeah, exactly.
The important thing is, right, is that the disengage tool on Gragas's kit is just super rare,
Mhm.
right? Not many champions provide that. So that's the big thing is like, we're already in this situation where Origin are playing in some ways counter to the meta because they're still placing most of their emphasis on their AD carry over their top laner. And they haven't really faced a lot of teams that do that. They've only faced KT, like LGD, obviously, is mid, bottom focused. TSM, mid focused. Flash Wolves, you're not going to play around Stake. Like, yeah, so they haven't really been in a situation where they've been super punished for playing around their AD carry, so. I don't
There's-
know.
there's no
And also
jungler.
not having Gragas to play around their AD carry is another factor. So
yeah, so maybe like the next best thing would be a Nunu or a Tom Kench. There might be some others, but those are the ones that I think Amazing could pull out. He's played Nid before. He's played Nunu before.
I'm not
I don't.
sure what else he would play right now. I mean-
I don't think he's a guy that can just pick up champions very quickly.
Yeah, he's not Solas, unfortunately.
Yeah, he's not someone like
he
Celeste.
might have secret champions though.
Yeah, that's
Well-
what I maybe don't know.
Yeah, well, it is interesting to see what they're going to pull out. You'd think Hermit has some sort of strategy in mind for this, given how he's been able to create some of these things that we weren't expecting going into it. But I also want to point out that Fnatic is a team that also kind of suffers from this. You know, you'd think
Rainover.
that they've only played Gragas twice with the Rainover, but the backup plan when he doesn't get Elise or Rek'Sai has been Olaf. Olaf has not been particularly amazing this tournament. It's 4-6 overall, but one of those wins was SKT playing it in the mid lane. And all three of those wins came from the top lane. And the problem with jungle Olaf is that it has a really hard time doing the things you want an Olaf to do. It's hard to, get some of that, get onto an AD carry, just rush forward and be that huge damage threat when you're coming out of the jungle. I don't know if that's something that they're going to be able to pull off consistently against KOO. I think KOO can punish that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if KOO also tries to force them off of the Elise Rek'Sai kind of dichotomy and see how they match up against that Olaf pick.
Well, what Olaf helps Fnatic do is Olaf actually has a surprisingly really good gank,
Mhm.
especially for solo lane. So
You
it works
hit
really
the
well.
Axe, Jesus Christ. you're
Yeah,
so
if you hit the axe, it's just like permaslowed forever.
Mhm.
And Rainover and Huni have really spectacular synergy, and so I think that's why Olaf is a good pick for Fnatic. And then also Olaf is a great early game, mid game skirmisher, and we know that Huni likes to spontaneously TP, and Fnatic just capitalize on skirmishes like we saw versus game one versus EDG. So I think Olaf can still work for them. It just depends on how the other team plays around that Olaf pick. Olaf, when an enemy picks Olaf, it's all about how you play around that against that Olaf. You have to play around it and not be baited into just like going in on him when he's able to just ult and get into like the back line.
Backline.
Hit,
There are
just to
certain champions that Fnatic like to play around the Olaf, like Lulu,
yeah.
stuff like that. Before we get more into this, I just want to go on this slight tangent about the Gragas. People say that if Gragas is banned or not, Origin don't really have a chance against SKT, and fundamentally I agree with this. But the point is not whether or not Origin have a chance against SKT. It's the fact that one champion ban unfairly affects one team over another. We know that Origin are more dependent on Gragas, and we know that they like to play these comps. Choosing to ban this champion now when you probably could have, like, this bug has been known forever, and then they do like a little bit of extra testing, and then it's like, oh, this is more common than I thought. You could have figured this out earlier, guys. Like, quite honestly, holy shit. and now it's like it obviously now affects one team over another. There's some other things that are affected over another. Banning it now is really, really stupid. It's like, and if your only counter argument is that Origin were donezo anyway, then I don't want to talk to you because you use the word donezo, but also just like, that's not the fucking point. Holy shit. That's all. Okay, I'm done.
Kelsey died for a little bit, but I think she's back now.
Mm-hmm.
Alright.
Yeah, you went super robot for a bit.
Okay.
You have to
Well,
repeat
The
everything.
point is it doesn't matter.
Right.
The point is that if you do something that affects one team more than another, it's still a shit. Even if that team is facing SKT and is done for anyway.
Yeah. So and not Origin, like everyone that's on red side is going to be handicapped by this removal
Yep.
of his champion.
Yep.
And yeah, and we know that like it's not going to be equal. One team is going to have more blue side advantages than red side, and we know that blue side already has had a huge advantage. I think it's close to 60% the win rate. It's somewhere around 60%. So we know that the sides are not even. Blue side does have like a slight advantage over red side in draft.
Mhm. All right. So because we've kind of talked about that for a bit, let's actually move into the semis.
Mhm.
Origin versus SKT. Do we expect SKT to just stroll all over Origin like they've done with every other team in the tournament, or is Origin gonna like actually take a tier 2 tower?
Yeah, so we know that SKT has not lost tier 2 turret yet in this tournament. So
Is
things
Origin
are
gonna
not
at least do that? Kelsey says no. Kelsey says no.
Look, if Origin play team solo mid style and put everyone mid and push mid, they can get a tier 2 turret. No, but seriously, I think Origin optimistically can get one game off of SKT. And Kelsey doesn't agree. But I think I'm just saying optimistically. Like if all the universes
It's
align.
optimistic enough to say that they're getting a tier 2 turret. Like, I love Origin, okay? But honestly, like, SKT have shown that the only thing that screws them up is if someone else gets their top laner ahead more than their top laner. Origin is not going to do that. Like, they're
Yeah,
just
Solas
not.
hasn't been playing
So,
very, very well.
it's
We'll
not just
see.
that, but they don't play towards their top, regardless. Like, so... And they can play towards the top for the series, but we've seen that if teams that aren't super used to playing like stylistically towards their top, suddenly won't become good at playing towards their top over like a weekend.
Yeah.
So I just don't see Origin being in a position where they can properly contest the 2v2. And when SKT get ahead in the early, they just kind of close really easily. Like they just know what to do with a lead super well. So I just think that that's it. That's it.
Well, that's the problem. If you go lane by lane, there really isn't a place that you could look at Origin and say, oh, this is where they're going to have some sort of advantage that can maybe get them into a game if SKT's off for whatever reason. You know, you look at Soaz, he's been very self-sufficient in terms of his laning. He's got a 6.4 CS lead at 10 minutes and a slight gold lead in that same time, which, you know, it shows that he's able to take care of himself despite not getting those ganks. But that's not going to be enough to take out Marin, who's been playing on a very different level and
like,
gets
I don't
some
care
attention.
about the statistics for Origin and their top lane because they haven't played top lane centric teams outside KT. Like they
Yeah.
literally haven't. It's literally irrelevant. Like this.
No, and that's kind of the thing. Like if you're going to say that Soaz is going to hold his own against Marin, he needs to look even better than that, and we haven't seen that. You look at the Bang versus Niels bot lane, because I know a lot of people who say like, oh, Niels is so good at the macro
He's
play.
good.
He's been like the rookie of the tournament. He's been great. What he hasn't been great at is early game pressure. The only champion on which he has more than one kill plus assist at the 15-minute mark is his Kalista, which he has his Sivir,
But
excuse
to be
me.
fair, he's
which-
gotten like a ridiculous amount in this tournament.
Yeah, the Callista has been great in the late game. It's 8 points CS per minute, 9.5 lead at 10 minutes, but only 0.03 kills and assists at 15 minutes for Callista. The Sivir has been the one. I misspoke earlier. The Sivir is the one where he's done very well. In those 2 games, he's averaging 2.5 kills and assists at 15 minutes, a much bigger gold lead. It's the only champion in which he has better stats than Bang if you take out the KDA, which is just insane for Bang. And then you have to take in mind that on those Sivir games, Niels is 35.7% of his team's damage. You're not getting away with that against SKT. They can isolate that. They can deal with it. And with everything else, there's just not that early pressure that Bang has been able to consistently have because he's getting ganks, because they know when to push and when to play it safe. And then whether it's Easyhoon or Faker, I feel like both of these SKT mid laners are more than self-sufficient. Easyhoon is perfectly happy farming up against Dexpeke. We know what Faker can do. It's just really hard to see the hole that Origin is going to find that gets them to that,
I don't think I'm just better. I'm just gonna be with you right now. Like, Origin don't draft for early game, they don't draft for lanes. So, like, analyzing this matchup via lane matchups is kind of pointless from my perspective. Like, I just think that the thing that matters right now is the 2v top, and that's just because we've seen cases where, like against CJ, SKT fell behind in the 2v2, or they had trouble with the. Like, the one thing I think that Origin has is. Okay. The one thing that I think that Origin has over SKT is that they are really good at globals. Like, SKT are like, oh, what is this? What's a teleport? I don't understand. Oh my god, someone's teleporting. What do we do now? But I don't know if they're going to use this well in the early to disrupt the lead. So that's my thing.
So I agree wholeheartedly that this is an Origin team that hasn't been playing for the early game. It's something that has to be taken into account when you look at the stats I mentioned earlier. But they've been playing a very different kind of game than the game I think SKT is going to allow them to play. SKT has the second lowest average game time of this tournament at 31.1. Only the Bangkok Titans were lower, and that was for completely different reasons, I think it's safe to say. Origin, in the meantime, has the highest average game length, like 42.1. Up until this point, they've been playing the kinds of teams where they can have these late game comps and really scale in, take advantage of their macro play, which has been one of their biggest strengths as a team. SKT rarely lets teams get to that. By the time that we're at the 20-25 minute mark, they're usually grabbing a Baron and looking to close the game or get the big objectives that they need. It would be a monumental task and a huge accomplishment for Origin if they were able to draft the way that they have drafted so far and take a win off of an SKT team that's just so good at maximizing every little thing they can do in the early game, which is why I have to wonder, is Origin just going to try to bring out a completely different play style to try to counter this early game aggression that they've struggled at times to deal with in their losses to, say, LGD or KT Rolster, where they were down 3,000 and 4,000 gold respectively and just never found a way back in.
I mean, yeah, that was my point, is that it doesn't matter because they suck in the early game, like, just in general. Like, their early game stats, like, they don't pick for early game. It's reflected in how they do in the early game. I mean, it's just, if they do decide to pick for the early game, we could see something different. Is the only difference, but it's just like they haven't been picking for the early game. So, yeah, you expect them to suck in the early game. That's about it.
Yeah. So I think then optimistically we can hope for a second
Tier tower.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm being a bit more optimistic and like not trolly, I think they can win a game, but it'll rely more on SKT screwing up than Origin, bringing their A game.
So even applying the North American strategy.
Yeah, just tilt them.
Make sure that Imp goes melee. There you go. That's the real North American strategy.
Or make sure they pick an all melee comp.
All right, so
I picked the Cassidy.
So everyone here thinks it's going to be 3-0. Nasser thinks there's a possibility of it being 3-1.
Yeah.
We all know that Nasser's crazy.
I agree.
Like, it's not crazy to say they can take a game. Like,
Okay. Defend it properly then. Let's hear your scenario. Let's go.
okay, so they're playing. Okay, so let's say Origin they're playing the blue side game, and Easy Hoon is starting. Origin get comfortable champion jungler 4, amazing. And then they can get the Anivia, and so they're able to like play the scaling comp. Let's see what else. They can play the scaling comp and hope that SKT don't pressure all lanes and get too much in the early game, and then they can just outscale them with the crazy Anivia pick and like a scaling AD like Jinx and Tahm Kench, for example, or with like Jinx and Morgana. The way they can win is basically SKT don't get too much out of the early game, and basically Origin win the same way they've been winning all tournament, which is with the scaling cup. At some point, it's just gonna hit a point where if it's like a 4K gold difference, it doesn't matter that much when you have an Anivia, a Jinx, etc. But I'm not saying like
How
they're
do
going
they
to win. Yeah.
How do they forestall the snowball though? Like that's my main question is how do they forestall the SKT snowball?
The Anivia pick is great at
Wave clear.
wave clear, basically.
What about top lane?
Top lane? I don't know. I don't know what Soaz is gonna play.
So is this just gonna play cannon and feed? Let's like.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think top lane is the biggest concern and not mid lane, especially if Easyhoon is playing. I think it's gonna depend on Soaz not feeding too much.
I mean, even in games where we've seen Febiven play, I feel like there hasn't been like one-on-one. You aren't seeing the mid laners get like these huge leads anyway. So
Yeah.
that kind of goes without saying. Like,
Yeah.
I'm worried about top lane because I think that's the most swingy lane, obviously.
Yeah.
So.
There's like, you can't always say that something bad might not happen. Something could happen. For example, EDG screws up and plays badly this whole tournament. Same with LGD. Sometimes things happen, and I'm not going to exclude that possibility of something that can happen. So maybe there can be a
Fair enough.
So yeah, I can't at this point I can't exclude anything.
So Nestor's ideal
Any given
situation.
Sunday.
Nestor's ideal situation for a 3-1 is Easyhoon has to start.
Well, I mean, I have interviewed Koma, so maybe I got Koma sick, and he got all of SKT sick. So there's that.
It'd still be a 3-1. Like even if they're like vomiting on stage, I
Well,
still
that's
think
all he's
SKT wins
arguing
that
for.
series.
Yeah, they're
All
gonna
he's
win this series.
arguing
I'm not saying Origin are gonna win. I don't see Origin winning this.
I'm
just
not saying you
it's
are. I just think it's hilarious your reasoning. You're like, the only way Origin will win one game is Easyhoon starts, you get the perfect draft,
Yeah.
and then life happens.
No, like I said, they play the scaling comp and they don't
Shit
let
happens.
SKT snowball so much. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but I'm not going to exclude the possibility.
Faith worked out so well for CLG.
Hey, you expected LGD to win the whole worlds, and they didn't even make it out of groups, and they lost to TSM. So you never know,
Yeah.
These things.
Wow, I think SKT.
I'm saying that. Okay, so my final thing to say is that I think SKT will 3-0,
Okay.
but Origin can win a game. I don't know why that seems too absurd. I feel like I'm the crazy one here. I don't know.
I mean,
My heart says 3-1, but my mind says
theoretically,
3-0.
Origin can
Yeah.
win the series, right? Theoretically, but the question is just like when you say Origin can win, I'm just wondering like how likely you think this is.
I don't think it's. I don't know. I think we're tunneling too much on predictions. SKT are going to win the best of 5, very confidently, and and it's going to be clear that SKT are miles ahead of Origin.
Okay.
Okay.
Kelsey just like to see you squirm. So do I. It's pretty fun.
I just have this idea that it's just gonna be a slaughter. So
Yeah, okay. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
Okay, so let's get enough of Nasser there. Fnatic
Let me
versus
breathe a
Coup.
bit.
Fnatic versus Coup. How do people think this is gonna turn out?
it's more interesting debate.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. I'm looking forward to it.
Chase, start us off.
It-
Fnatic versus
It's one of
Coup.
those. It's one of those things where so much of this seems to be the proactive versus reactive styles that have defined these teams. Fnatic is constantly looking for these skirmishes, playing this early game. They actually have the second highest early game rating at this tournament, just because they've been able to pick these fights and take advantage of some of that warding we were mentioning earlier and put themselves in these early game advantages. And haven't
Also,
been
they
punished,
get a lot of blue side.
and they have had a lot of blue side. I think it's been very interesting watching this team kind of put it together what Forbiven's been able to do in just keeping things locked down so that Reignover can be looking towards keeping Huni alive. But at the same time, they've never played a team as good as Coup Tigers in terms of capitalizing on every little mistake. Huni has done a lot of things. He's gotten 38 kills. He's got a 3.6 KDA, but he's responsible for 27.9% of his team's deaths. That is punishable against Smeb, someone who may not be this over-the-top power laner all the time, but we saw last week he's perfectly capable. If you overextend, they will punish you, and it will hurt. And you look at Reckless, who has used even things like Kennen to try to bully out the early lane and kind of push some of those advantages. Prey is one of the better, just utility / disengage kind of AD carries. He plays the Ashe so well. He does such a great job of keeping other laners off of some of those early game advantages that they can rely on. So it really is a matter of, do you believe that Fnatic is going to make the kind of mistakes that Coup can capitalize and win the same way they won against KT? Or do you think that Fnatic can play a cleaner game and force Coup into being the proactive ones, which, as we saw in Coup's loss versus KT in Game 1, when Coup is forced to pick fights, that is far less effective for them as a whole.
Who wants to go first?
So I think that I would say that Coup is favored for this matchup if it wasn't for Fnatic having the blue side advantage. And I think that Coup might not be able to punish Huni, especially because they have Hojin, who is not the best of junglers. Even in the series versus KT, Someday and Score were able to 2v2 both. We're able to 2v2 Smeb and Hojin and to win the 2v2. And I think that a similar event might happen where Huni and Reignover win the 2v2 over Smeb and Hojin. But I think 1v1, Smeb is the better top laner, and I actually think he is a better laner than most give him credit for. He's actually a really good 1v1 duelist. Even back in the Korean playoffs, Smeb was able to solo kill First Blood Someday on Lulu versus Anar, which is incredible. I think he's a really great 1v1 duelist. He's actually, I think right now the best top laner in this tournament. But I think, so I don't think Coup will be able to take advantage of Fnatic's early game, but where I think they can win is in the mid game if Fnatic make one misstep. Because I think when a team makes one slight mistake, for example, if we look at their game versus KT did TP'd bot with Darius, and then everyone just collapsed on Someday. So I think if Fnatic make just one misstep in the mid game, Coup are really good at taking that advantage and out team fighting the enemy team. Even though Fnatic is a great team fighting team.
Okay.
So are you saying that Reignover is better than Score?
No. Because I'm saying that Reignover is better than.
Okay, but score is also better than Hojin.
Mhm.
And you're
Yes.
saying that Someday and Score won the 2v2, but KT still won.
But
Or Ku still won, based
Well,
on. So you
yeah,
think that.
yeah. So that's why I
So,
think that Ku doesn't really need to, won't really need to depend on winning the early game that much.
so I'm wondering, I guess, is like, do you think that Fnatic's 2v2 top is that much better, that they can win that much more convincingly, or that Fnatic is less likely to make like the mid game mistakes that KT made? Like that's the question that I'm asking.
It depends on 2v2 matchup like the champions, but I think that Reignover and Huni can, like, I would favor them to win that 2v2 just because Hojin, he misses so many skill shots, especially like
Right.
if he's on Elise. I think he won't. It's. I'm not gonna put my money on him to help Smeb get ahead.
Right, but we also said that Someday and Score win the 2v2. So are we saying, so again, I'm asking, like, is their 2v2 that much stronger, or do we
Yeah.
think that Fnatic is less likely to make mid-game mistakes than KT is?
Yeah, for me, it really comes down to how much KT prioritized Someday above all else in that series. When Someday would start giving up kills and Smeb started turning the lane back around, even with Score setting it up in the early game, it really forced the whole team to try to protect him, and they would overextend consistently and cost themselves in huge ways that weren't necessary. Fnatic does prioritize Huni to an extent. It is a Huni goes in and Fnatic follows because they have to follow in on those kinds of engages. But they're also very happy letting Forbidden and Reckless carry in a way that I don't think KT was as comfortable letting Nagne or Arrow be those guys. That's the thing that I think can be a huge difference here, is that even if, the 2v2 at the beginning isn't enough of an advantage to give Ku that lead, I'm not sure that Fnatic is going to overcompensate to try to force that 2v2 to be the one thing that matters. I think they're very happy to say, well, we take a slight advantage here and then start getting advantages in the bot lane and the mid lane as much as we can. And that mid lane matchup is the one where I think Fnatic can really shine, because Kuro, when he's not on Victor, has been he's been flawed, I will say. The event horizons were a bit off. His Azir has been something that we can go back to the LCK and say largely inconsistent, I think is fair. He's at like a 20% win rate on that champion now, going back to the beginning of summer. This is where I think Fnatic has an advantage that KT just doesn't, because Nagne wasn't able to punish Kuro the same way, and they weren't forcing Kuro off of that comfort Victor pick in the same way that I think Fnatic will, especially given that they have 3 blue side games in
Well,
this series.
I think Kuro is much better than Nagne, and I think Kuro is good at not losing lane. And we said a while ago that the mid lane, you don't really see many solo kills happening. You don't really see advantages being made in the early game in the mid lane. And I think he has a lot of comfort picks. He has the Azir, he has the Victor, and most recently we've seen the Veigar. So I don't think Kuro will be that much of a problem, especially because I think Nagne is worse. I think the biggest thing is that we know that Reignover does one of two things. He either farms till 6 or he ganks top. And if Fnatic don't get advantage for top, they won't get that lead,
Excuse me.
and they won't be in a very comfortable position in the mid game. And if they are not in a comfortable position in a mid game versus Ku, who are one of the best mid game teams in the world, then I think that's where Ku wins. The Fnatic is going to need to rely on getting Huni ahead, because that's where Huni excels. If Huni's not ahead, he does not know what to do. And we've seen that multiple times before in this tournament and in the ULCS.
Hold up, there's one other thing. Because we were initially talking about the top lane 2v2,
Yeah.
Chase kind of covered it, the whole somebody got ahead and threw the lead back to Smeb. What makes you, are you confident in saying that even if Reignover and Huni win the 2v2, that Huni's not going to overextend and do the exact same thing?
I think Huni is smarter when he's ahead.
Okay.
And
So
and
you think he's better at using his lead than someday, at least at roles.
yeah, he because he is very he has very high like mechanical ability on champions like Riven, and we've seen that he now prefers to not play. We haven't really seen him on like Fiora, and I don't think he really likes Darius. We've seen him on champions he's more comfortable on that he is kind of known for, so stuff like Riven. We've seen him on Hecarim. So I think Riven and those kind of like high mechanical champions are going to be something that Huni is going to rely on. And once he gets the lead on those, he has the playmaking ability to not mess up because he is so ahead. And we saw that versus. I can't remember the game. I think it was versus AHQ when he TP'd bot and got the quadra kill with Riven. Like he just knows how to play when he's ahead, and he doesn't know how, he can't be as cocky when he's behind or kind of like even.
I think that was IG. I remember being
Yeah.
distinctly disappointed.
Oh,
when
yeah.
Chinese
Oh,
team
God.
turned.
It was such
And-
a
And one last thing is that we might not even see the 2v2. That's
True.
another thing. We might not even see the 2v2 because so far we've seen no one really gank Huni except for EDG and in game
Kind
one.
of.
Yeah, EDG in game one
It
did.
was more like a counter gank.
There was a
Oh,
counter
game
gank and
one,
then
yeah.
and there was a counter gank and then they
Yeah.
towered over him, but they also still gave up a kill. So yeah, we might not even see the 2v2. So I don't know how Ku is going to approach that game, approach the early game.
I think Kojin does gank top. I mean, he might not gank top well, but he
Yeah.
ganks top.
Yeah.
So I think
We'll be seeing 2v2s.
there will be 2v2s. Again, it's the only team I think left that doesn't have a top lane focus styles Origin.
Origin.
So, obviously, Origin isn't in this semifinal.
Yeah.
So,
So what are your thoughts then?
I mean,
Joe?
I think like going back to mid, I do think mid is going to be a big thing. I also think that Gorilla is going to be a big thing. Like I think that the X factors here are Febiven and Gorilla that are going to be kind of underrated just because I do think both of these teams are very 2v2 top centric. I think Gorilla can have a really big impact. Surprising. I think if they do like a lane swap situation again, I think having Gorilla and Smeb in the same lane can't be understated.
Mhm.
I also think that Febiven's roam potential has been really strong. And that's the one thing. I think that Reckless has been picking Kennen not so much to do well in lane, but to self-peel, because again, Fnatic like to ignore their bottom lane. And so that's something to consider, and I think that Ku can actually get an advantage in bot using Gorilla. I also think that drafts, like I don't know anyone who will dispute that Ku has like the best drafts in the tournament. Yet they seem to constantly underrate them, which I think is really ridiculous considering how well drafting has been a factor. I think Fnatic's drafting has been really interesting. I think we'll see the red side strategy of not banning Mordekaiser and GP again. But I think
from Fnatic.
yeah, because Reckless, when I interviewed him, said that we haven't shown the full potential of that strategy.
Yeah.
Because they had to remake that game. So I think that we'll see that, but I think that Ku will be better prepared because they've seen Fnatic do it, and so they'll have something prepared for it. I think Ku is like the team that if they are on red side, they're not super intimidated by it. So if there's one team that I can count on to not be affected by the red side disadvantage, it's Ku. So gun to my head, I would say Ku take this,
Yeah.
but I don't think you can count Fnatic out either. I think we'll say, for example, that Fnatic have been had like a really good early game, but I think a lot of that has been affected by getting Elise. in a lot of situations. It's really easy to have a good early game if you get a lead. But I think that their early game has been more inconsistent than people realize. Like EDG had a lead in one game, and then they had a game and a lead in another game that had to be remade. They lost some of their leads in group stage, and it was like closer. They didn't really have a lead versus HQ in that one last game because HQ snowballed bot, all those other things. So I think that Ku and Fnatic have both had really inconsistent early games in this tournament. So I think there will be a huge factor in early game, but both of these teams also have shown that they can come back through mid pretty well. So it's really hard to call this.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of
It's
strengths.
gonna
and
be. I think it's
weaknesses.
gonna depend
both
mostly
sides.
on draft.
Yeah.
That's going to be the biggest.
And that's why when it comes down to, well, Ku has the better draft, I think, just generally. So that's why I would say Ku, but if Fnatic does win, that's not surprising.
Yeah. I have I have Fnatic winning this 3-2.
3-2.
I think it's going to be very, very close. I think this is going to be the closest series we have throughout the bracket stage. I just have this right now. I have a lot of faith in what both Vivin and Reckless have been able to do consistently. From everything I'm hearing, we have only begun to see some of the crazy ideas that Fnatic is going to be pulling out in picks and bans. And while I do believe that Ku as a whole is a better drafting team, I do think the blue side advantage matters, especially with the way this jungle is going to go. I really like what Fnatic has been able to do, and I want to see. I think it's going to be very, very close, but I give a slight edge to Fnatic, especially because just a little advantage, and I like Fabivin a bit more than Kuro enough that could be a tipping point in the direction for me.
Well, I was actually just about to ask everyone for their score prediction. So, Chase is not. Master, what do you think the end result is?
I'm gonna go for 3-2 Ku. I can see it being 3-2 for Fnatic as well. It's going to be a really close matchup, and I'm excited to watch it.
Kelsey?
I think
You said
3-1
Ku, right?
Ku.
Well,
I just say 3-1 because I think that whoever gets good momentum in the series will have a lot of control. Like, I think Fnatic are less used to being in losing scenarios. So if they end up losing, I think the first or second game, I think they'll have more trouble coming back.
Okay. Alright, so I think that's pretty much good to round up the semis. There was one topic we wanted to give to Kelsey.
Hi.
Hi. That would be the rumors of the Korean on Exodus. Like, do you think all the Korean players are going to go back to Korea after this performance from China this year?
Not really. Just based on some of the interviews that I've had, for example, Kakao has said he's just going to try to learn better Chinese for next year, etc. I don't think we're going to see a mass Korean on Exodus. I think we're going to see some players try to go back to Korea. And the Chinese orgs aren't like heartless people, so if players want to go back, they're not going to just hold them and then have them suck, right? They're not. It's not like that. Deft made a comment that he might be looking for ways to go back. And you could say, oh, there are some players who are going to try to go back. They don't care about money. They obviously care about money. They made almost
Everyone
$1
cares
million
about money.
or more than $1 million this year. So, of course, they made enough money to not have to work really hard for the rest of their lives in 1 year. So now they can do whatever the fuck they want. I don't want to hear this bullshit. The players that go back care less about money. They have the luxury of not really caring about money for the rest of their lives now because they spent 1 year in China.
Plus, if they didn't care about the money, they wouldn't have fucking went in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's whatever. That's a dumb argument.
They can always go back to China in the end and just, get a $1 million streaming deal.
Exactly. And I want to dispel kind of a misconception about why they're there. They're there because the streaming platforms are creating contracts with the Chinese organization. So the streaming contracts effectively are paying for the Korean players. So the reason why they're there is because the streaming platforms want the popular Korean players to stream in China. That's why the Koreans are there.
Mhm.
So later, the Korean players can always retire and come back to China and just stream. Like, even without the. Part of the issue, again, is also that the streaming platforms are made less money than they wanted. Because a lot of the times the streaming platforms will inflate their streaming numbers or whatever. Okay?
Mhm.
And they do that because they're trying to get investors to pay them. They obviously didn't get that many investors this year, so they might be less willing to pull in more Koreans, might be paying less for these Koreans in general, so it's like maybe potentially less lucrative on the whole. Like, I don't know the change in the numbers or if there were changes in numbers or anything else. So I'm just saying that the Koreans who want to go back to Korea aren't necessarily super admirable or don't care about money. It's just that they already made a shit ton of money, so whatever. Thank you. And I don't really see that many going back to Korea anyway because they like money. And that's not something that we should shame them for. Like, if someone is going to pay me $1 million to go to Korea and play a video game, China and play a video game. Even if I could have a better team in Korea, I'm probably going to go to fucking China. Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
whatever. Okay.
As Jalen Rose says, keep getting them checks. Why, if someone's willing to pay that, get what you're worth, man. I have all the respect in the world for players who are able to maximize their brand and take advantage of these things. I don't think we should be, stigmatizing them or overwhelmingly praising, guys who go back. It's just it's what works for them and what point in the career they're at, and they make the decision that's right for them. And all power to the people, whatever they end up doing. But to put some kind of moral angle on it, I think it's just kind of ridiculous.
That said, I want the Koreans to go back to Korea because I liked covering my region when it was a hipster region and no one cared anyway. And no, I want Koreans to go back to Korea because if it was Korean League was the most exciting when there were Koreans, and I feel like Chinese League was still exciting when there weren't Koreans. So, to maximize the excitingness of Korean and Chinese League, the Koreans in Korea seems to be the best option. So, yay.
All right, cool. I think we'll just round it out from there. We've talked about a lot today. Shoutouts. Chase, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm hoping you guys can hear me.
We can hear you.
It's been a pleasure.
Your
been a
camera's frozen.
pleasure
Just
being
give
on
your
with you guys.
shoutouts.
Yeah, who needs to see me? The point is that you guys can hear that I am at Redshirt King on Twitter. I love hearing from you guys. Please do follow. I like to live tweet during all the games and hear everything you guys have to say. You can also find my own podcast. It's soundcloud.com/esportsgamblinghour. We're about to make a big push. We should be on iTunes within the next couple of days, which is very exciting. Gives you guys way more opportunities to come find us and listen to what we've been doing. And we're spreading out into potentially, not leaving any League of Legends content on the table, but doing other things on top of that, especially during the off season with BlizzCon and everything coming up. So thank you guys so much for having me. It's been awesome talking to you guys, and hopefully you at home will keep up and we'll be able to see what happens in these amazing semifinal series.
Master, shoutouts.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It was fun. I'm currently freelancing at followesports.com. That's where Thorin and Emily Rand also write at. And I've recently written 2 articles for them, one about Bjergsen and the Team Solo Mid-centric mentality. And I've also written about Fnatic and their recent good form. So check that out. You can go to my Twitter and find my author profile from there.
All right. Kelsey, shoutouts.
My name is Kelsey Moser. I work for the Score Esports. And lately I've been doing interviews and writing stuff. And my esports editor believes in things called previews, which I don't necessarily believe in, but I write them anyway. So I'm writing the Coup versus Fnatic preview that's coming out soon. So check that out. Anyway, have fun.
All right, thanks for everyone to coming on. Shout out to all of you, obviously. We'll see. We'll try to get everyone together next week. We haven't been having weekly episodes because everyone's been absolutely busy, and in my case and Emily's case, we've been really sick. So I really shouldn't be talking too much anyway. But it's been a pleasure to host the conversation today, and good night.